Unmil Karadkar. I'm faculty in the School of Information. I teach courses at the intersection of people and technology, and that's kind of where this question is targeted. We talked about data and massive data, and you guys deal with data that gets generated automatically. But every so often, we saw examples of either where the data isn't what you expect it to be. And in your case, Neville, you mentioned that human beings tag the data a whole bunch in the early stages. So could all of you comment a little bit on what happens when the data isn't what you expect it to be? What kind of roles do human beings play? Are these the same people who are programmers, or do you have dedicated people who will do data wrangling kind of things? And if that is the case, sometimes that can be a very boring job. How do you motivate people to stay focused on that?
Interns. That's not as
I would say our in our sort of job here, there's just so much data that you couldn't do it manually, and you can't evaluate look at every little piece of data and say, oh, that looks like a good one, that doesn't look like a good one. So we have to generate, think about processes and think about tools and think about checks that we can be doing to make sure that data is valid. And it takes a lot of time to develop, to see something that's weird that messes you up. And then think about, okay, not only how will I detect that in the future, but how will I detect anything that made me think of in the future, and build processes and tools around that. And so I think, one of the things I talk about is how all the problems we've run into in data, for example, over the years sort of inoculates. If we're not doing a good job, we'll just keep running into the same problems over and over again. For us, it's taking every one of those and sort of using that as an inoculation and figuring out if we can avoid that whole class of problems in the future. And automate everything.
Go ahead.
I've got a similar answer, right? We have a lot of automated tools. We have a lot of automated rules in place. As our data is coming in through our streams, it's processed against those standards that we've defined, against the expectations that we have. And a fair amount of it ends up in the error directory. And when it doesn't get touched by a person to go have it be cleaned or brought in. It's usually not of enough value. There are places where an engineer will get to the point that he's got that low-level granular, and he'll actually look at it and decide that one particular point doesn't look right, but that's a detailed analysis. It's certainly not someone's job.
So we cover this in a couple ways. The information, a lot of what we're taking in is what somebody has written or said about something. So now it's much more free form, that we need to actually put structure in. Now, there are variables and there are other pieces of pure data that we can bring in, but there's a lot we've got to put structure around. So we've got machine learning that will look at some of it and can handle it to a degree. The moderators that I mentioned earlier, those are college graduates. A lot of them, honestly, are stay-at-home moms that can work in various different things. They're paid by the characters that they moderate. So there's a set of training that we put them through, and then we can scale that workforce up and down. It's almost like our own Amazon Mechanical Turk to a certain degree, but with very specific skills. Beyond that, we have a social analytics team. That's an internal team where if we're starting to see spikes or different things in the data, that we can hand off. That's not our engineers. That's a group of folks that are specifically looking at data trends, flaws in data, interesting things, et cetera, on a broader level. And then when you come down into the R&D area, that's where we have the data scientists. So you almost have different tiers for handling different things, and people who are willing to handle certain, stay-at-home moms are plenty happy to dig through certain elements. The PhDs with propellers on their heads, not so much so, and they want to do it in different ways.
Yeah, and it's like that for ours. We have different personality types that just like to do different things. But one of the basic processes we do sampling plans on all of our data. So we run sampling plans, and as long as they're still fitting within the parameters we're expecting, everything's good. The minute one hits, then we stop and go, okay, now we got to look at the whole data set.